We are in the midst of World War III. Welcome to Geopolitics Demystified. I'm your host, S.L. Canton. It may not seem like it, but the fact is we are in the midst of a World War III. We're kind of sleepwalking into a gradual World War III, step by step in different areas. And actually, when you look back at, say, World War II, the same thing happened. So, for example, Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, but the US, UK, and France did not immediately start attacking Germany. It took many years. And it wasn't until 1944, really, that the British, Americans, the French, they were attacking Hitler in Europe. And before that, the war was pretty much focused on Germany versus the Soviet Union, Russia, basically. And then in the peripheries, there were many wars. So the same thing is happening in one step at a time right now. And the beginning was, of course, in 2022, more than 2.5 years ago, with the Ukraine war. And that basically seemed like it was just between Russia and Ukraine, but it was really between Russia and the entire West, because the entire European Union, the US, and some of its allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, they were all supporting Ukraine in many different ways, whether it was in propaganda terms, in votes in the UN, sending arms, and the CIA, the NATO advisors, everybody was in Ukraine. And they were basically running a lot of the weaponries, high-tech missile defense systems, and doing the organization, the intelligence. So whenever Ukraine would say attack Crimea with missiles, it was all coordinated by the US. So maybe the Ukrainians, they brought in donuts and coffee, but all the other stuff, the intelligence, working with the satellites, planning the strategy, spying, all of that was done by the US. So it was basically a proxy war, and it was getting hotter and hotter. So in the beginning, if you remember, Biden said, hey, we will never send tanks and fighter jets and missiles because that would be World War III. That's what he said back in 2022. And then you fast forward 2 years, what happens? That's exactly what's been happening over the last year or so. The West has been sending HIMARS, all sorts of tanks and other weaponries, and then missiles. And now they came very, very close to sending in long-range missiles. And only when Russia really threatened and drew the line on the sand and sort of implied that this is going to be a nuclear war, the West has temporarily backed off. But they're still sending in the F-16 fighter jets, and the long-range missiles is just one decision away. So that's a very, very dangerous situation in what's happening with Russia. And then even before that came to an end, the globalists started the war in the Middle East. And so it, allegedly started off with the October 7th, but it all seemed very pre-planned. And they said, oh, this is the 9/11 for Israel. Well, what did 9/11 do to the US? It started a huge campaign of a decade-long war. That was the 9/11. 9/11 was not just about attacking Afghanistan. They took that as an excuse to attack Iraq. And if you remember, just a few days after 9/11, the people in the Pentagon and the neocons like Paul Wolfowitz and all these people, they said, hey, we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. So that was the golden opportunity. And this opportunity was actually written out by the PNAC, the Project for New American Century. That was a paper written uh, in the year 2000. So like exactly 1 year before the 9/11 attacks happened, these guys, they wrote a white paper and they said, we have a great opportunity to reorganize the geopolitics, and we can make sure that the American century is going to be prolonged. And the way to do that is to have huge wars to get rid of all the people who are not puppets of the US and Israel. But in order to do that, we need something like the Pearl Harbor so that Americans would go along with the plan. So they planned it already. So if you have a little bit of suspicion, if you're a cynical person, you would say, hey, 9/11 was planned. But regardless of if it was planned or not, the outcome was that a huge war to remap the Middle East, right? So when Netanyahu and others, they said that October 7th was the 9/11, then I knew right away that this is not just going to be about Gaza. This is the reinvention of the plan, the 7 countries plan that's going to be restarted. And if you actually go back to the 1990s, Netanyahu co-authored a white paper with the neocons from the US, and it was called The Clean Break. And that was also essentially about taking out Iraq, taking out Iran, because those are the 2 big, most powerful and non-cooperative countries in the region. So like if you take out Iraq and Iran, then it's going to be absolute domination by the US and Israel of that region. So we are seeing that happen now. But the only thing is that Iran is a lot more powerful today than it was 25 years ago. So maybe they should have taken out Iran back in 2002 to be Machiavellian, but they couldn't even do a good job with Iraq. And they were able to take out Libya in just a matter of a couple of weeks, right? So NATO bombed Libya, and it was pretty much done in a few weeks. But they couldn't do that in Syria because of geopolitical situation. The world was not ready. And now what we're seeing is that although they were very successful, the Israelis and Americans were very successful against Gaza, where, Hamas had basically nothing. They didn't have any proper missiles. They didn't have the anti-tank missiles. And of course, they didn't have any missile defense systems to shoot down the missiles or the planes. So they were totally hapless. And all they had were some stupid rockets that killed nobody. And Hezbollah seemed very powerful, but with that, the exploding pagers and a lot of spies and probably the informants, they were able to take out the leaders of Hezbollah. Nasrallah had been the leader of Hezbollah for 32 years. and he was killed right away. So one could say that Israel is having a stellar success against Hezbollah. That's not deniable. And Hezbollah's rockets have not been so powerful either. But Iran has been another story altogether. So, what's the situation now is that Iran was able to send 180 ballistic missiles towards Israel, and they hit at least some targets. And that has really shaken the Israeli American confidence. Because what if the next time Iran sends, say, 1,000 missiles? Will they have enough defense systems to bring down all those missiles? So we don't know what's going to happen. And so, in the best case scenario, it's going to be a stalemate, and then Israel is going to back off, and then the resistance will sort of continue in a Cold War sort of a situation. But what if Israel and the US have something that we don't know about? Okay. What if they have some tricks up the sleeve and then they could really do a shock and awe and destroy the Iranian missile sites, the nuclear sites, and maybe the infrastructure, all of the oil refineries, and then they're able to stop the missiles. So that's one possibility. We don't know who is capable of doing what. And then, for example, one of the possibility is that Iran starts to attack all of the neighboring countries, and it's going to stop the ships, the oil ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. So then, if it starts to bomb the American military bases in the region, that means that Iran is going to be attacking Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Jordan. So that's like borderline World War III. But then what if Iran already has nuclear weapons, right? What if they had already built it secretly? Because we know that they had the uranium, the enrichment all the way up to 60% or so. And then from there, all the way up to building a bomb is only a small step forward. So what if they have a nuclear bomb and then they use that against Israel or the U.S. military bases? So that's pretty dangerous. So we are at a very precarious situation with Russia. The world is at a very precarious situation in the Middle East. And if that's not enough, the Americans are already planning on a war against China. So all these military generals and think tankers, media, politicians, they are blatantly talking about a war with China in 2027. And China is already involved in some sense, right? They are supporting Russia in numerous ways in terms of finance, the consumer goods, semiconductor chips, parts and components for missiles, and same with India. And actually, India is also sending some secondary and banned parts and components to Russia in order to make whatever, missiles, tanks, whatever they need. So you can see that China is involved, India is involved, Russia is involved, the US, Europe, Israel, Middle East. What more do we need, right? And then you just need like one big trigger. So, for example, China cannot allow Russia to fail because if Russia fails, then there is going to be an American puppet north of China, and there will be like 6,000 nuclear missiles pointing at Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, right? That is not good. And then the American puppet might also stop selling oil and other natural resources to China, and they will switch back to being friends with Europe and the US. So that would be an impossible situation for China. So China has to make sure that Russia does not fail. And both Russia and China have very, very deep interest in protecting Iran and making sure that Iran does not fail. So we talked about it in two monologues before, titled Russia, China, Iran. And that's the alliance that is very, very crucial for the global South and the anti-Western interests, the BRICS groups, and so on. So you can see that with Russia, with Middle East, we're just one mistake away from turning into a huge, disastrous war. And with if there is a nuclear war, it's not going to be just one nuclear bomb. Okay. So it's not like Russia throws one nuclear bomb and then the US throws one nuclear bomb from Germany, wherever, and then they both say, okay, let's stop. No, once you start the nuclear war, it's going to be like all out wars, right? And then like everyone is going to be targeted. Then it's going to be New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, Texas, Houston, everything is going to be targeted, right? And then the US is not going to just say, okay, we will only attack, Russia, and Russia will only attack us. No, the US wants to make sure that China is not going to be alive to become the global hegemon, right? So the US strategy will be like, well, if I'm going to go down, then I'm going to take everyone with me. I'm going to take down Russia as well as China, right? So this is the very, very scary part. And the scientists who are looking at the nuclear, the Armageddon, the nuclear clock is just a few seconds away from midnight or the nuclear disastrous war. So that's where we are now. And what we need is, all the nations to get together and to calm down and to figure out a peaceful solution. But unfortunately, that's not a very good option because the US, we will do this in another monologue, the US empire is in a very, very dangerous situation. They have huge amounts of debt. They have lost manufacturing. They are losing in technology to China, who is leading the world in publications of scientific papers, in getting patents, in leading, like, in one of the ASPI, the think tank from Australia. China leads in 57 out of 64 crucial technologies. So the US is in a very precarious situation. And then you look at how polarized and how crazy the internal politics of US is. They are on the verge of a civil war. And if, say, for example, BRICS takes off in terms of currencies and trade and de-dollarization, then the value of the US dollar is going to plunge. And then the interest rates will go up. And it's a vicious cycle. And then the cost of the imports are going to go up. And then the lifestyle of the US will plummet. And then the higher the interest rates means people are suffering. The government will be forced to slash funding. They might even be forced to shut down the military bases. So there are a lot of worst case scenarios for the US if BRICS and the Global South process continues. So they need to stop. In order to save America, they need a war. That's the situation we are in. So how it's all going to end is going to be very scary. But we'll be closely following what is happening, and we'll be doing this once a week. So I hope you have a good week, and cheers until then.